What's the most common job in America today? If you guess the services industry, you're not even close. Farming? Forget it. Factory work? Work on your research. If you've run out of ideas, here's the answer. According to a recent study by NPR News, truck driving is by far the most prominent job in the United States. Traditionally, the U.S. was a production-based economy, but with many production jobs being outsourced to developing nations, America is left with the task of transporting the goods that it no longer produces but imports. With such a large proponent of the country dependent on the trucking industry, either the employment or the services it provides, it leaves our economy quite vulnerable to the fluctuation of fuel prices. Fuel is most definitely a global commodity, which means our economy is particularly vulnerable to external forces. One such force is China. Their economy has grown exponentially because of American outsourcing, and their fuel consumption has followed suit. Because of this, prices at the pump have skyrocketed, impacting not only the trucking industry, but consumers as well. This habitual, self-inflicted wound by American outsourcing may have negative implications at first glance, but there is a silver lining: the spread of capitalism. My name is Nicholas Pender, and this is my presentation, Outsourcing, a Temporary Ailment to the Trucking Industry. Before we get started, I'd like to provide some of my background information as it pertains to this study. I have 6.5 years of logistics experience, beginning with my enlistment into the Air Force as a logistics planner in August of 2008. Since then, I've gained experience in a variety of logistics functions. I've managed and coordinated the development of base supporting plans, conducted deployment execution operations at the wing and major command levels. I've managed a $300 million War Reserve material program spanning the Pacific and Indian Ocean, and have coordinated Air Force transportation and personnel supplies within the deployed area of responsibility. I'm currently a student at Bellevue University, enrolled in the Supply Chain and Logistics Management Bachelor's of Science program. This presentation is part of the assigned curriculum. In today's agenda, we're going to devise a problem statement to help identify what fluctuating fuel prices have to do with capitalism and how this applies to the trucking industry. To do this, we're going to break down the situation into the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Who is impacted by the situation? What is happening? What is the impact? Where is the situation unfolding? When is the situation going to occur? When did it happen in the past? Did it happen in the past? Is it happening now? And will it happen? Will it continue to be a problem? And why is this happening? What is the driving factor behind these fluctuating fuel costs? Why haven't we been able to avoid this situation? And why is capitalism so important in all of this? After answering these questions, we'll compile these findings into an overall problem statement. From there, I'll provide a summary of what we've covered, and I'll provide an opportunity for questions at the end. When identifying who is impacted by fuel price fluctuations, we have to understand that fuel is a global commodity, and for all intents and purposes, the lifeblood of the global economy. Therefore, first and foremost, we must broadly state that the international community is most affected. Next, we must identify who is using oil the most right now. Developing nations such as China and India are key players in today's oil consumption. Traditional players include most of the developed world, particularly the United States. Maintaining focus on this study, we recognize the American trucking industry is definitely dependent of oil price fluctuations. Branching further, we see that truck drivers, goods producers, and product consumers all rely on this vital industry. Finally, it can't go without notice that big oil has a role in setting oil prices. Refineries set the pace of fuel production, and oil-rich nations pose to receive the greatest profits from the developed world's appetite for oil. We have to recognize that China's economic expansion and growth in the middle class is driving up fuel costs around the world. For the U.S. trucking industry, this means higher costs at the pump are cutting into profits. Also, when fuel prices rise, consumers spend less, which reduces demand for shipping. Between the drop in orders and the increased operating cost, trucking no longer becomes profitable, so there is potential for trucking companies to fail. Such was the case for the nationally renowned freight trucking company, Jevick Transportation. Citing high fuel and insurance costs, tightening credit markets, and economic downturn, Jevick Transportation Incorporated closed their doors on May 19th of 2008. Their story is nothing special. Numerous companies went under during this time frame due to the trickle-down cost of increased fuel prices and the stock market crash. Again, fuel is a worldwide commodity, so fluctuations in its price are felt across the globe. However, the blow was particularly strong on the U.S. economy. The U.S. is the world's largest consumer of oil, and China is not too far behind. With so many industries reliant on oil, it's hard to pinpoint where fuel price fluctuations are felt the most. The most immediate impact is on those who visit the pump from day to day, the consumer. Consumers are what drive demand of fuel-consuming services, such as the trucking industry. These industries and locations in which they operate are immensely impacted by fuel price fluctuations. Truck driving is the leading industry across America, so it's hard to find one part of the country that isn't affected. In the map displayed, courtesy of NPR.org, you can see which industry provides the most amount of jobs in each state. Truck driving easily outnumbers any other job in the United States. Also of important note, oil producers, like the major OPEC, OPEC member nations in the Middle East, feel the pinch when demand of oil fluctuates. Essentially, it's the change in consumer demand that causes big oil companies to fluctuate their prices through control of the supply of oil. From the early to late 2000s, demand for gasoline skyrocketed. This excess demand reflected not so much an increased use of oil and its byproducts in the United States, but rather additional demand for oil and other industrial commodities arising from emerging economies that traditionally did not use so much oil. Basically, countries such as China and India were consuming a lot more oil than they had done so in the past. This has a lot to do with American outsourcing of production after the Cold War era. Capitalism had become the reigning champion, and companies saw the potential for greater profits through outsourcing. We'll dive deeper into this topic on the why slide, but the important thing to note here was the time frame leading up to these fluctuations in fuel prices. It was a time when old communist-based nations were warming up to the idea of having a capitalism-based free market. There are many reasons why fuel prices fluctuate, but the primary cause is supply and demand. We now know that China's growing economy caused fuel prices to rise to never-before-seen numbers, over $100 a barrel. However, why did it come to be that China began consuming so much oil? As stated in the previous slide, outsourcing of American products to China is what slowly began to raise China's middle class. This is the force of capitalism. American companies benefited from outsourcing in the form of profits, which also had the complementary effect of benefiting China with economic growth. With such a broad improvement to China's average quality of life, it was only a matter of time before they acquired a taste for oil. This drove up the cost of oil back at home in the United States, causing the trucking industry and many others to suffer greatly. Essentially, the American style of capitalism of putting profits before all else caused the economy to backfire. That's not to say that capitalism is a terrible concept. Simply, the liberal application of capitalism in the U.S. economy could not predict the sharp increase in worldwide commodity demand it would induce. This presents us with our situation. We know there's a problem with the way the American economy does business, but in order to wrap our brains around it, we need to present a clear statement of the issue. A problem statement gives us that ability. A problem statement is most effectively constructed using the 5 W's concept, which we have prepared for and identified in the previous slides. Here is our problem statement. Burgeoning free market nations like China are driving up fuel costs worldwide, causing the U.S. trucking industry and its derivative services to lose profits. I chose this problem statement because it narrows down fuel price fluctuations to a cause and effect scenario. With this statement, root cause analysis can take place, and key players in the trucking industry can devise ways to adapt to the current fuel market. In conclusion, I posed the question as to what is the most common job in America, trucking, and highlighted the importance of fuel prices in today's economy. We then used the 5 W's method to help devise a problem statement as to why the trucking industry is under such financial stress. We determined the impact fluctuating fuel costs can have on key players in the economy and what was the source of those changing costs. After that, we established how widespread the effects of fluctuating fuel costs can have, mapping out where the trucking industry is most prominent in the United States. Then we narrowed down a timeline as to when this all occurred. Not only did we identify a timeline, but we highlighted the chain of events which led to the current economic climate. Doing this allows us to see a trend in how geopolitics can affect commodity costs and prepare us to predict future fluctuations in prices. Most importantly, we found out why these fuel fluctuations are occurring and why there is no simple solution to the problem. This is why it's essential to form this problem into a problem statement, which was finally divulged in the previous slide. Again, problem statements allow us to begin root cause analysis. It gives us a starting point for DMAIC and the 5 whys. This presentation paved the way for that crucial step in the problem-solving process. If anyone has any questions, you may present them now.